And have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come before Thee at this time, thanking Thee for this Lord's Day. We're thankful for the opportunity that You've given us to come here this morning and to open up the pages of Your Word and to study and to learn more about You and how to serve You. And Father, we pray that all the things that are said and done here this morning are in accordance with Your will. And we pray that much good would come from our efforts here this morning. We pray that the things that we study, that we would make the right applications in our lives and that we might become better servants to Thee. Father, be with those that of our number who are sick, those who are not here. We pray that whatever obstacles keeping them from being here would be removed and that You would bring them back to us. We ask that You would go with us now, be with us throughout this class and on throughout the rest of this day in our worship. Forgive us of all of our sins. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we are in Matthew chapter 8. Our lesson book is lesson 7. And we're going to be talking about various miracles and the cost of discipleship. So first, I want to thank Rick for filling in last week. I appreciate that. I know that there's a lot of effort that goes into preparing for a Bible class, and I appreciate you filling in for us last week, Rick. Let's go ahead and jump into the lesson. Let's read Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4. Matthew 8, verse 1. When he had come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as testimony to them. So in last week's lesson, Jesus finished the Sermon on the Mountain, and now he's coming down the mountainside, and a large crowd is following him. And so word's getting out about Jesus and all the things that he's doing, the healing and the miracles and, the authority, by which he speaks. It's drawing great crowds. And people are now coming to him, for healing. And so in verse 2, there's a man with leprosy that has come to him and he's wanting to be healed. And it says he knelt down before him and asked, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. So, his kneeling down before him, calling him Lord, this man, he has faith. He's acknowledging, Jesus, as Lord. He has the power to make him clean. He's showing faith here. He knew that Jesus had the power to heal him, and he had faith in that. And then in verse 3, Jesus responded that he was willing. And so he touched the man and commanded that he be clean. This leprosy, just in studying it a little bit, and it was a hopeless and dreadful disease. One commentary said it was like living death. It appears a lot of people with leprosy had these withered limbs. They actually became white, from head to toe. It was really a dreadful thing to have. It's not somebody that you're going to want to touch. In fact, it was forbidden to touch someone with leprosy. It was defilement. But we see, Jesus had compassion on him, and he touched him, and he made him clean. And so when Jesus touched him, all the defilement fled. At the touch of Jesus, all that impurity, fled from him. In verse 4, Jesus tells them, don't tell anyone, go and show yourself to the priest and, offer the gift Moses commanded as testimony to them. Why do you think Jesus said to go and don't tell anyone and go to the priest? Any thoughts on that?
So the priest would see that there was somebody out there that had the ability to heal and do miracles that no one else could do.
Yeah, I think that's the point there about as testimony, to them. our book author suggests that there's a couple of reasons. One was to keep the excitement down. He had already drawn these great crowds, this multitude. A lot of people were bringing people to him to be healed, and so there was an idea that it would keep the excitement down too. But the other part, Rick's exactly right. It was a testimony. It would tell the priests that the one that could heal the people from leprosy had come. The one that could do the miracles and heal them had come. The other thing is that the Old Testament was still in effect at the time, and so there were some procedures that they had to follow for this man to be pronounced clean. And so it's a ceremonial cleansing, and all that's outlined in Leviticus 14. But there were regulations to follow, sacrifices to be made, where they could be pronounced clean and basically enter back into society. And so there's this thought that, he needed to go straight to the priest so that he could do that and fulfill the Old Testament. Jesus was making sure that the Old Testament that they were still under was being followed here at the time. Let's go ahead and read Mark 1 and verse 45. Mark 1 and verse 45, it says, "However, he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction." So it doesn't appear that the leper that was healed followed exactly what Jesus had said. It says because he went out and he spoke freely and told everybody about it. Let's also read Luke 5, verses 14 through 16. Luke 5, verses 14 through 16. "And he charged him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. However, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together and to be healed by him of their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed." So it appears the leper, spoke freely. The news continued to spread. It didn't really keep the excitement down. More and more people were coming. The news spread even more about Jesus, and it drew more crowds and more people to him. And it said Jesus often withdrew to lonely places because of this and prayed. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on this section?
I think the fear of the crowds pressing against him. In fact, you're going to get into it, about him escaping and going on to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and then the ship and calming the storms and all that. But the word was spreading, and people were coming with all kinds of infirmities and so forth, and pressing against him, and they just wanted to touch him. And I don't think any of us could probably realize, what that's like. I'm sure some of our sports people kind of understand a little bit when people are trying to touch them and grab them and actually hurt them, by pressing against them. And, I think that was one of the main reasons why Jesus wanted them not to go tell anybody, about it.
Right. No, that's right. Yeah. And I can imagine, that if anybody had any kind of serious thing going on health-wise, and they heard about this happening, I mean, you're going to want to go. You're going to want to come from all over, and there's just going to be a lot of people, a lot of crowds, and that we're gathering. But I thought it was interesting, the telling him to go to the priest. he was careful, not to obey the Old Testament and obey the ceremonial cleansing and everything outlined in the Old Testament, because the Old Testament law, the old law, was still in effect at the time. Anybody have anything else there? All right, let's go ahead and let's read the next section, Matthew 8, verses 5 through 13. Now, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented." And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." The centurion answered and said, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, "Assuredly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go your way, and as you have believed, so let it be done for you." And his servant was healed that same hour. So it says when Jesus had entered Capernaum, and this is where Jesus had now made his home, basically. It says a centurion man came to him asking for help. And a centurion is essentially, it's a Roman officer in the military, and he's a Gentile. Okay, not a Jew, he's a Gentile, he's a Roman officer, and he came to him asking for help, asking for his servant who he valued to be healed. I want to read Luke's account of this too. Let's go to Luke chapter 7, and I want to read verses 1 through 5. Luke 7, starting in verse 1. Now when he concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one of whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us synagogues. It says here that this servant was dear to him. It was someone that, this Roman soldier, the centurion, he highly valued. It says he's ready to die. He was sick. He was paralyzed. He was about to die. He was suffering terribly. And again, word had spread about Jesus and his healing and the miracles that he was doing. And so this centurion man heard about it, and he sent the Jewish elders to him to bring him back to heal his servant. So, we see in this account of Luke that the centurion didn't actually go to Jesus himself, but he sent these Jewish elders to Jesus. Why do you suppose that he sent the Jewish elders instead of going himself to do this?
He probably thought they would receive them better than himself being a Gentile.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the centurion had respect for the Jewish nation. He was a Gentile, and thought that maybe, these Jewish elders might have more influence with Jesus than he would. But he did. He sent these representatives to do it. In Luke's account here, in verses 4 and 5, we see that the centurion was highly respected by the Jews. The Jews thought a lot of him. In verse 4, it says they pleaded with Jesus and that he deserves this. And, they told Jesus that he loves the Jewish nation and that he had built them their synagogue. There's some of the study that I read, there's some speculation, we don't know for sure, but there's some speculation that this centurion was a lot like Cornelius in that, he was a devout man. He was a Gentile. He wasn't a Jew, but it appears that he was a devout man. But for whatever, he had favor with the Jews. Okay. So back in Matthew 8, in verse 7, Jesus asks, shall I come heal him? And to me, I think this shows the foreknowledge that Jesus had because of what happens next. But Jesus goes with them, and when he gets to the house, the centurion comes out and he says, Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. Just say the word and my servant would be healed. You don't have to come in and touch him. He knows Jesus' authority. He knows, he understands the authority, being a Roman soldier and having authority himself. He understands. I think, he's also, the centurion is showing great humility too and respect, for Jesus too. But there's an acknowledgement there of his faith and, knowing that he doesn't have to come in there and see him and touch him. He just has to say the word and he would be healed. So, he knows Jesus has the authority and the power, and he can just do it from where he's at. And so in verse 10, Jesus it says he's marveled at this. He's marveled at his faith. And he says the following, he says, I have not found in Israel anyone with such great faith. I thought it was interesting that there are 2 times Jesus is marveled about something. This one, he's marveled at this centurion's faith, that he had. The other time, anybody remember what the other one was? He marveled at the lack of faith that the Jews had. But anyway, this centurion is a Gentile. He's not a Jew, and he says, he hasn't found anyone in Israel with this kind of great faith. So the faith that Jesus found, the great faith, it wasn't in a Jew. He found it in a Gentile. So anyway, Jesus, because of that, he takes this opportunity to make a point. And in verse 11, the point is made, he's saying, many Gentiles are going to come from all over the world, and they're going to sit down in the kingdom of heaven with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in verse 12, many Israelites for whom the kingdom was prepared for are going to be cast into outer darkness, a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, torment. And, the point is that the gospel, what Jesus is now teaching, it's open to everyone. It's open to Jews. It's open to Gentiles. It's no longer about being a Jew, your ancestors, your race. That's not what's going to save you in this new teaching, the new teaching of Jesus. It's only those who believe and obey that are going to be saved. And it's saying here, many Gentiles will obey and they will be saved. There will be many Jews that do not obey. They're going to reject Christ and they're going to be cast into outer darkness. And then in verse 13, Jesus heals the servant. He tells the centurion to go home. What you believed happened. He didn't come in there and touch him. He just said the word, and by those words, that servant was healed. At that moment, those words were spoken. The servant, was well. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that section there? Okay.
The common denominator on all of this, whether it's Jew or Gentile or whatever, is obedience.
Yep.
And that's something that the Jews didn't learn, and then they're members of the church today that really don't understand that our responsibility is to be obedient And I think that's the common denominator of linking the old to the new is obedience. And when they were under the old law, the Jews had to be obedient and do those things that were essential, like animal sacrifices, offering, rolling their sins forward. And then, of course, in the new kingdom, the new dispensation of time, obedience is essential and important.
Yeah. And really, that's what true faith is. You know, that your true faith would move you to obedience and to obey. That's what it does.
But Jesus never taught disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
He taught that during this period of time, he was teaching them to be obedient to the law that was the Mosaic law, because that was enforced. And he said he didn't come to destroy, but to fulfill the old law.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the time was right and that law was fulfilled, then this ushered in a new dispensation of time. But under all dispensations, obedience was the common denominator.
You know, this is, as a kid, this has stuck with me. I remember you teaching this. You know, you talked about Noah, you know, and Noah's obedience. You know, if Noah hadn't followed what God had said, God wouldn't have saved him. I mean, ultimately, God saved Noah. But if he didn't follow those instructions, if he didn't build the ark, if he didn't use the gopher wood, if he didn't do all those things that were commanded, then God wouldn't have saved him. But, you know, God always has required obedience, you know, to receive his blessings, spiritual blessings. Anybody have anything else there? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Verse 14. Let's read verses 14 through 17. Now, when Jesus had come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother lying sick with fever. So he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and served them. When evening had come, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out the spirits with a word, and healed all who were sick, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, He himself took our infirmities and bore our sickness. So here, you know, again, his mother-in-law was sick in Peter's house, and Jesus came, he touched her, and she was healed. And it says she immediately got up and served them. And my understanding of this is that she got up and prepared a meal for them immediately. Something that was interesting, I thought, that was pointed out. You know, Peter is often referred to by Catholics as the first pope. But if you note here, you know, it says Peter had a mother-in-law. This was his mother-in-law. Peter was married. This would unqualify him to be a pope, according to what the Catholics teach. But I thought that was interesting. But verse 16 and 17, it says, that evening they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out spirits. Let's go ahead and read Mark 1, verses 32 and 34. This is Mark's account of this. Mark 1, verse 32. At evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he did not allow the demons to speak because they knew him. And so we're going to talk more about this in just, at the end of this chapter. But I do want to point out, the demons knew who Jesus was. And it says he didn't allow them to speak. But they know Christ. They know his power. And they know their fate, ultimately, what their fate's going to be. And we're going to see that more at the end of this chapter. But in verse 16, back in our text, Jesus cast out spirits with a word. He healed all who were sick. And in verse 17, it says that Jesus fulfilled the words spoken by the prophet Isaiah. And this is in Isaiah 53:4. So it was prophesied long ago, that Christ would come and that he would be doing these things many years before, it actually occurred. It was prophesied, and he's fulfilling prophecy here. Anybody have any thoughts and comments on this section? Okay. Let's read verses 18 through 22. And when Jesus saw great multitudes about him, he gave a command to depart to the other side. Then a certain scribe came and said to him, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then another of his disciples said to him, Lord, let me go first and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead. So Jesus here is teaching about the cost of discipleship. In verse 18, we see there's a great multitude around him. And, like was mentioned, all these people were close to him, and he wanted to get to the other side. He wanted to get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And so he's telling them, let's go to the other side. And one certain scribe says, hey, I will follow you anywhere. And Jesus' response is saying, Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. What's the message here? What's he saying?
He's telling the virgin there that, you have to give it all up to me. You follow me, give up everything you have, or you're not able to follow me.
That's right. There's a cost, and you have to weigh the cost. We must count the cost. Jesus didn't have a home. There's no guarantee of earthly comfort is, one of the points. There's going to be difficulties. There may be persecutions. It may cost you something, and you got to be willing to give it all up. You have to be ready. It may not be easy at times. But we must understand that going into it, that there's going to be difficulties, and be willing to suffer whatever consequences that may come, with our service. And we need to understand that. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man here, which is an interesting term. It says he called himself that 31 times, I think, as our book author points out. The term was also used in Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. And our lesson book, points out it's a term used to express two things. It's his humanity and his humility, and that he came to serve. In verse 21, another disciple said, Lord, let me first go bury my father. And Jesus' response was, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. And I think the same point is being made here, is that we must put Jesus first and our service to him first above all things. We don't delay our duty to follow Jesus. We must be totally committed to the Lord. It's a lifelong commitment. He comes first, and we don't put anything earthly above him or before him. We don't put our mother, our father, anyone, any earthly thing ahead of our service to him. He comes first. And I think that's the message that's being sent here. Anybody have any other comments or thoughts on that?
It's interesting to me, that Jesus is not condemning going and burying your father.
Mm-hmm.
He's establishing the priorities.
Right.
We cannot let anything come between us and with serving the Lord. And I think that's the message here. And it's not the message of you can't go bury your father.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a priority. He comes first. That's the message that's being sent. Anybody have anything else?
It doesn't really indicate that this disciple's father was already dead. This might be another way of saying, I will follow you someday, Father, Jesus, but not now.
Right. Okay. I didn't think about that, but yeah. And we don't delay. We don't put anything off. we do it now. And I think that's another thing is, we don't delay our service for anything.
I think kind of go along with it too, let the dead bury their own. Those that are not following me are basically dead to me. Let them take care of themselves. If you're gonna follow me, you're gonna be part of me, then you have to let those that aren't following take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Not that we don't need to go tend to them,
Right.
but let them take care of that if you're gonna truly follow me.
Right.
Give it all up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, especially what you said, it's our attitude is that we have that attitude that we will, and no matter whatever occurs in our life, if we seek God and do His will and put Him first, then all that we need will come, He will supply.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's right.
Important to know too that it's not just a commitment for that instant deal, it's a commitment for life. It's something you gotta do day in and day out as long as you're alive on this.
Right. It's a lifelong commitment, there's a cost there. There's a cost of discipleship, that has to be weighed, Yep. Okay. What did I get through? Verse
We was on 22.
22. Okay, so we're on 23 now. So let's read the next section, 23 through 27. It says, "Now when he got into a boat, his disciples followed him. And suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so the boat was covered with waves, but he was asleep. Then his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, 'Lord, save us, we are perishing.' But he said to them, 'Why are you fearful, O you of little faith?' Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, 'Who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him?'" So here they get into this boat. They're going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. His disciples are with him. And it says a great tempest arose. And of course, a great tempest is just a very powerful and violent storm. The Sea of Galilee, there's a couple of different things I read on the length and width of the Sea of Galilee, but it's 6 to 8 miles wide, about 13 miles long, north and south. And so there's some high hills that are around the Sea of Galilee, and it produces it kind of funnels the wind down, and it can produce some very violent winds, and those violent winds produce these big high waves, and it can come quickly without warning. And it appears what happened here. But there were some very violent winds and some high waves. In verse 24, it says, suddenly a great tempest arose. These waves covered the boat. And it says the disciples were scared and they woke Jesus, asking him, to save them as they were perishing. And keep in mind, many of these disciples, they were fishermen. They were experienced to being in the sea and the boats, but they were afraid and woke Jesus. And in verse 26, Jesus rebukes them and says, they have little faith. And so he arose and he rebuked the wind and the sea, and he caused them to calm down, and they marvel at this. They're amazed, and they ask, "Who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" This lack of faith, that's mentioned, and then with this question here, like, who can this be, that even the winds and sea that obey him? I don't think they fully understood who they were with, and that they were, I don't think they fully understood that this was the Son of God, that has all power and authority, and that he's over all things, and that he's more than just a human being. I don't think they fully realized who they were with. I do want to read Colossians 1. Colossians 1, 15 through 17. "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Jesus, he's over all things. He created all things. He controls all things. All things are his. They belong to him. And, the disciples' amazement and their question, indicates to me that they really didn't truly understand that they were in the presence, of God, of deity, the Son of God. But I do think after seeing this, I think they're starting to realize, that he truly is the Son of God. And they're amazed at his power and what he can do. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that, Rick?
I think the fact that he states that these apostles were, a lot of them were fishermen to seamen, they'd been on the sea. That indicates to me that this storm was not just a normal everyday storm, because they had dealt with it. So it was a very severe storm. It was so severe that it had experienced fishermen and seamen scared.
Right.
That just denotes the power and of what was going on, and that how Jesus just calmed it off.
Yeah, well, and Jesus being able to sleep during all that.
That shows pretty strong faith.
Yeah. Anybody have anything else? Okay, let's go ahead and read the last section here, verses 28 through 34. And when he had come to the other side, to the country of Gergesenes, I guess that's how you say it, there met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Now a good way off from them there was a herd of many swine feeding. So the demons begged him, saying, If you cast us out, permit us to go away into the herd of swine. And he said to them, Go. So when they had come out, they went into the herd of swine, and suddenly the whole herd of swine ran violently down the steep place into the sea and perished in the water. Then those who kept them fled, and they went away into the city and told everything, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to depart from their region. So, once they get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, there's, 2 demon-possessed men, coming out of the tombs. And that's just, where they were living in that area. And it says they were exceedingly fierce. No one could pass by. It was dangerous. These demons had completely taken control of these men. But it's interesting, they say, what do we have to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? And then they ask if he has come to torment them before their time. So just a couple of observations here. It's interesting to me that they know and recognize Jesus. They know his name, and they call him the Son of God. The demons believe. The demons know who he is, and they know what their fate is. He says, the question, is he come there to torment them before their time? That indicates they know the destiny, their fate. They know that the ultimate triumph of Jesus, they understand and they know what's coming, and they know when they know that it wasn't time yet. They thought it was before the time. But they know, that Jesus is the Son of God and that he will triumph over all evil. And so they ask, they beg, if you're going to cast them out into that herd of swine. And so, Jesus permits this, and, they were cast out and they go immediately into the swine, and the swine run violently down the steep slope into the sea and they perish. In verse 33, it says those that had kept the swine, they fled and they told everything that happened. They went off and told everybody what had happened. In verse 34, it said the whole city came to meet Jesus and begged him to depart from the region. Why do you think they begged Jesus to depart?
think they didn't want chaos in their area?
I think,
Maybe they
yeah.
didn't, I don't know.
I think, well, I think that that's actually, you know, part of it. You know, I think they were amazed at these supernatural powers, but we see, when we'll read this here in Mark, it says they were afraid. You know, they were very afraid. You know, and you know, it's one of the commentaries, and it might have been in the lesson book, but they may have been, you know, fearful that they might lose more property. You know, there's about 2,000, you know, swine that, you know, perished. They may have been fearful of what else is going to happen here. But you know, I think they were afraid of the supernatural natural power. I think it's worthwhile. Let's go ahead and read Mark 5. We'll read Mark's account of this. Mark 5, starting in verse 11. We'll read verses 11 through 20. Mark 5, verse 11. Now a large herd of swine was feeding near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, Send us to the swine, that we may enter them. And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon possessed and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon possessed and about the swine. And they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he had got in the boat, he who had been demon possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord had done for you, and how he had compassion on you. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. So this demon, you know, possessed man, you know, we read here, he wanted to go with Jesus. You know, they saw him, he was sitting, he was clothed, he was in his right mind. All these people saw this and they were amazed. And it says they were afraid and asked Jesus to leave. But with this demon-possessed man, he wanted to go with Jesus, you know, but Jesus didn't permit him to go. I think he had other plans for this guy. Jesus told him, you know, go and tell all the great things that, you know, the Lord had done for you and the compassion that he had on you. And in verse 20, it says, he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. You know, this demon-possessed man essentially sounds to me like he became a preacher. You know, and that's what, you know, Jesus didn't want him to come with him. He wanted him to stay and proclaim all that Christ had done for him. And so this man did that and went to his own country and began to proclaim all that Jesus had done for him. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that section there?
Do you think any of that's on his part could be based on anger for losing all that many swine?
It could be, yeah. Yeah, I think it could be. They could have been upset about it. You know, I don't know. It seems to me that the owners of this probably weren't Jews because they owned swine. Maybe that's some speculation there. So I don't think that they were Jews. I think they were Gentiles. But I think they were very afraid. I think that was part of it. They were afraid they might lose more property. But they were afraid of all the supernatural power and everything that Jesus had done. And it says they were afraid. I don't know exactly why they were afraid, but it says they were afraid.
You know, the demons are the devil's crew.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we have that today. You know, the devil has his crew out operating among us today. And we have to be on guard, you know, for the devil and his crowd. and they had to be on guard for the devil. Now they thought the demons, the devils, the evil people, they just wanted to disguise themselves as swine because the Jews wouldn't touch them. You know, they were let them alone, let them just go their way and do what they wanted to do. But you know, Jesus and God are over all of that. You know, and we need to be very careful today. They say, well, we don't have demons today. Yeah, we do. The devil has his crowd, and they disguise themselves however they can, possibly. Right. And we have to be on guard. Well, how can you tell the demon by their behavior and what they're advocating? They're against God, and they want to keep us away from God and being obedient to Him. But yeah, I think you're right that they disguise themselves as swine, and then the Jews wouldn't touch them. They wouldn't kill them. They wouldn't do anything to them, you know, because they just avoid them, and they could just go their way and do what they wanted to do.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that part of it with, you know, just going to the swine because the Jews wouldn't touch because it was an unclean animal. I haven't thought of that. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we're not demon possessed today, but the devil is active and working and trying to devour us for sure. And he has his minions that are working for him.
Can I ask, I don't know if we have time, but so at that time, is that the devil could just enter? Like, you know, you said that it went into the soul, but see, Jesus had to allow it. That's the point I'm getting. He had to allow it. So
he permitted that. Yeah.
Say, you know, you just can be demon possessed. You have to allow it, don't you?
Well, so I didn't go into a great deep study of that, but what I did read some commentaries and some things, and I was talking to Carrie about this morning, and I want to go back and look at it more, but my understanding is that those who were demon possessed, it happened because of their sin. There was something going on, and I need to study that more, but it wasn't, they couldn't just go into anybody, but it was allowed to because of their sin, and I need to read that a little bit more. But
another important thing to note about that, when those demons went into that herd, they ran to the sea and drowned, destroyed them. Jesus knew that's what was going to happen. He knew that those demons would be gone. They would be destroyed by going into that herd, even though that's where the demons wanted to go.
Yeah. There, you know, this is a little bit off topic, I guess, but, you know, there was some commentaries that talked about, you know, this is an example that, you know, animals are not people, you know, and they don't have souls, you know, and that, you know, there was an idea presented about that as too, that, you know, it's man and their soul and is important, and that these animals are not creatures with souls. Just another thing thought was interesting. Okay, thank you, appreciate it.